What's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to the War Room. This is Chris Baldwin, aka Fight Goddess, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Melissa and Eddie, and we have a very special show for you today. We are talking about sports governance, and we want to welcome Dr. Lisa Kihl from the University of Minnesota to this program. She runs a program at the University of Minnesota, the School of Kinesiology, called the Global Institute of Responsible Sport Organizations. And we're going to have a thoughtful conversation on how can we improve or instill honesty and fairness in our sports systems. That's on a community level, right? All the way up to professional level. Okay, because there's an issue. And so we're going to talk about that today. And I'm going to take this right now over to my brother, Eddie Goldman. Take it away.
Good. Thanks a lot. Good to be speaking with everybody. You know, on this show, we've mainly focused on corruption in boxing, which, as we know, is endless and timeless. But boxing, as seedy as it is far from the only sport that is corrupt. There are a lot of sports that are out there that are much more polished and respected, that are just full of corruption. And that's a topic that we're going to discuss with Lisa Kihl, because the battle, my view is that the battle against corruption that's taking place in boxing cannot be done separately from the overall battle against sports corruption. And Dr. Kihl has a number of very interesting projects going on. The Global Institute for Responsible Sports Organizations, also at a university, recruiting students to discuss the possibility of setting up a national sport integrity system, and a lot more. So we're going to find out about all of that on this edition of the show. And Melissa's on already, and Lisa Kihl, again, welcome to our show. Hopefully we'll be able to dig up some of the dirt on sports corruption and more importantly, what the hell to do about it.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here this afternoon. I really appreciate you inviting me and giving me a space to talk about a really important issue that seems to not be the focus for media or the general public. It's more about, you know, Monday morning quarterbacking or talking about player contracts or the game or whatever. And so if we don't have integrity in sport, we don't have the public's trust, and we may as well be watching the WWF. So I think it's really critical that we have continued conversations about the breadth and depth of integrity within sport organizations and the systems that run them, and how can we promote integrity and not see it just as a kumbaya moment, but also think about that those should be day-to-day conversations, but also thinking about where are integrity risks so that we can restrict the violations or breaches that we see, and the systemic corruption that we're seeing in many sports in every country in the globe. So it's just not, you know, a Russia issue. It's a USA gymnastics, Penn State, you know, you name it. Many organizations are dealing with it or not dealing with it. And so I'm really happy that you want to have this conversation today.
Yeah, let's discuss some of the major examples that you talked about. Of course, in gymnastics, there was just the congressional hearings where a number of top, some of them very famous gymnasts, Simone Biles and a number of others, but a number of them have been raising this for many, many years. What had happened with this so-called Dr. Larry Nassar, and who was the doctor for USA Gymnastics. And it recently, what recently came out, even though Nassar is in prison and he's going to be there for the rest of his life, that they made numerous complaints to the FBI about all this. And the FBI basically did nothing about it. This went on for a long period of time.
Yep.
So
But, but what's interesting, so this was, I found this interesting because when all of this came out, the report that was presented back in, I don't know, when there was, I don't know, 2018, 2019, I'm getting my years mixed up because we had a year gap because of COVID. But there was a report that came out, and it was public knowledge that the CEO of the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee was buddies with one of the FBI investigators in Indianapolis and had spoken to him. And it somehow got the investigation squashed or slowed down or whatever they did. So that
which guy was that? Was that Blackman?
I believe it was. He was friends with one of the FBI agents. And he also talked to some of the media, newspaper reporters, and they backed off as well. So there was something going on that Blackman had some sort of power or there was something going on, some sort of collusion or whatever you want to call it. And so we knew of this. And so it's interesting to me, here we are in 2021, and all of a sudden we're disgusted that the FBI didn't investigate until the LA FBI decided to investigate because there was a charge made from somebody within LA. But the other piece to this as well is that prior to even some things coming out within USA Gymnastics, Michigan State had several athletes raise concerns. And because of Title IX, you're supposed to investigate those. Well, they found they didn't really do a real investigation. So you have Michigan State, you have USA Gymnastics, United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, and the FBI, 5 institutions fail to do due diligence. And so, you know, I'm a little skeptical of the Senate have this hearing now after we already knew about this years ago.
Well, not only that, but, you know, let's put the fine point on it. Some of these women were children when this happened.
Absolutely. It's
We're talking
child rape.
pedophilia.
Absolutely.
You know, so it's, you know, sports corruption, yes, in the sense that organizations fail, but their failure is heinous crimes. And it's not just, you know, somebody, okay, took a kickback to in some kind of a corrupt situation, but this is absolute failure of a whole generation of gymnasts, and God knows how many generations before that, as children who were being systematically raped. It's just outrageous.
For gold medals and a reputation to protect the USA. Well, probably Michigan State and the USA Gymnastics and the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee. The other thing is, like, is it in this particular case, because it's child rape or it's you know, rape against teenagers, but it's about girls, that it's not as important if we saw like Donahue, the NBA referee who was caught gambling. Like, I think we had more conversations about him and whether he was throwing games and which games were thrown. That would seem to be more important to the public than raping girls and knowing that they were being raped, or when he was under investigation, not pulling him out and allowing him to continue to work and protecting him. So I don't get why, you know, certain types of corruption seems to get a bit of a pass versus other types of corruption. And so that's a separate thing that we need to talk about. Why are we allowing sexual violence of young athletes to keep occurring? And it's not just in gymnastics. We've seen it in swimming, ice skating. We see it in the volleyball circuit where we've got AAU coaches are sleeping with players and people know about it. Same thing with women, with girls basketball. And nobody says anything because they want their kid to get a scholarship. And if they say anything, they're afraid they're going to get blackballed. So we have a serious issue about dealing with sexual assault in sport.
Rape culture in general in the United States.
Absolutely. It's a part of a broader discussion, rape culture, period, across the world.
Right.
For some
Yes.
reason, it's okay. And it's not as sanctioned as maybe other types of crimes. We prefer to send somebody to jail for 10 years for marijuana use versus
Exactly.
somebody that was engaging in rape of young people. So we really need to start having some serious conversations about protecting athletes. And it's interesting, today or yesterday, the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee released that they have this platform now where athletes could come and submit their accusations, and that would be independent. And I'm thinking, who would have trust that actually somebody's going to go investigate and do the right thing? I mean, it's the system that's the problem. It's not, those athletes said that they were being raped, that there was something weird going on, and they were either retaliated against or they were ignored. So why would this new system all of a sudden now be trustworthy?
Right.
You have to believe in the system. And so how are they creating trust within the system that athletes know that if something is reported, it's going to be taken seriously, and people are going to be held accountable?
Oh, in terms of the work that your institute does, what are the kinds of things that you are looking to put out as policy, or as providing the sort of the backbone in research that you can then promulgate into these kinds of public organizations, such as USA Gymnastics Committee and so on, or US Paralympic Committee? And are there things that you are looking to achieve in your institute to assist in that process?
Yeah, one of the projects that I've been working on for a while is trying to develop a national sport integrity system for national sport organizations. And so I'm doing some pilot work with my colleagues in Australia at Canberra University. And so trying to, well, let me back up. The way that people have thought that the best system to address integrity risks and promoting, well, we don't really promote integrity, but if we were going to, was good governance. If we have good governance principles, therefore, if we have transparency, we have accountability. They don't really talk about what kinds of accountability, but we will be, be good organization, right? And I don't think it's just about good governance. I think we need to look at what's a founding framework that we can create a network of a system. Because if you think of a sports system, it's got multiple levels, particularly, in the United States. It's a federated system. It's club, state, regional, national. So how can we think about, in this framework, to start off, who are the actors that are responsible internally and externally to create and facilitate this system? So most organizations in other countries, they have an integrity officer. So they would help facilitate, oversee the NSO's integrity system. And then you have external actors. So who are the regulatory institutions and what's their role? So it's a little tough in the US because we don't have a minister for sport. So we don't have in the Senate or the House any type of person that actually oversees sport. There's no oversight. So that's one problem in terms of external regulation or external accountability mechanisms. Who from the government is responsible for overseeing sport and making sure that if do they have the right rules and regulations? How are the police connected, whether it's federal, local, state police? How are they connected and what's their role? What's the different anti-doping agencies, whether it be, national, international, or Safe Sport, or different, what are the external entities, watchdog groups, and what's their responsibility, and how are their agreements that says that we will work together. This is our roles and responsibilities, and we'll work together to ensure that we can collect information, we can investigate, and we can hold people accountable if they're not doing the right thing. So that would be the first part of a framework, is thinking about who is involved in this system. And I don't think in the US we have even begun to have these conversations. And then the next part is, so you have a sport organization, well, what's their integrity management framework? Like the infrastructure. So what are the policies? What are the agencies? Who runs this? What are the day-to-day operations? So if you think there's sport competitions, we have rules, regulations, we have sports officials, like that's one aspect of it, but you also have the administration, you have high performance, you have grassroots participation. Who's involved? Or what kind of ethics infrastructure do we need to make sure all those types of management and programs are done with integrity? So that would be the next piece. And then the other part of the framework is the accountability mechanisms. So I mentioned before, you've got the regulators, but you also have social accountability. So what's the media's role? What's the community's role? What's the sponsors? What are fans? Encouraging them to speak out, and if they see something, say something, or having conversations about how do we make change, and we make sure that our organizations are a safe and healthy place to participate in. So it starts off with kind of the three basic components of a framework, and then you implement a system, but it should be designed around the sport itself. I don't think anybody should be imposing that system, but they should at least have those components and thinking about how they can promote integrity and then limit risks and violations. So that's what I'm working on, and it's keeping me up at night. It's a long way away. And then the work in Australia, not to babble on, but we're working with Canberra University, and that's in the capital of Australia, in the Australian Capital Territory. And we're looking at 9 different sports and looking at their local clubs and their integrity system in relation to their state and how they work together or don't work together, because that's the part of the system. If you're not collaborating and coordinating and helping with capacity and how they're delivering it, then you're not going to have a system that works. So we got things going on, and we are a long, long, long way away before we probably could see some change. Because I've got my biggest challenge, I think, is getting the American community to really talk about integrity to think of the word integrity as a system, and think about having these conversations.
Yeah, I think it's important what you said about Australia, and they have the Sport Integrity Australia that brings together a bunch of organizations, including their anti-doping agency, and a number of academics that you mentioned at Canberra. I think Catherine Ordway, Matt Nickel, and a bunch of other people are involved in that. There's also been discussion over the years by the handful of very intrepid sports reform people around the world. I know you've spoken at the Play the Game conferences in the past, and this was brought up years ago. Jens Sire Anderson, the international director, that raised and others have raised the issue of creating some type of world sport integrity agency, sort of what WADA does for doping, except dealing with all these issues of sport integrity. And you also mentioned, the problem is, if you brought this up to most Americans and said, well, they have Sport Integrity Australia, we need something like the Sport Integrity America, I think you'd get about the same kind of look on their faces if you said, I think we should join the United Federation of Planets or something like it, talking about something from outer space. They just won't comprehend it because we're so far off from it. I mean, the sports that we focus on, like sports like boxing, the combat sports, integrity, the people don't even know what that word means. It's kind of a joke. And even in the more traditional mainstream sports, there are questions raised all the time about match fixing, and in a sport like tennis, a country club sport, not so much on the top level, but on lower levels. And I'm seeing some of these reports about football played around the world, which Americans still call soccer, unfortunately, but that there's fixing going on all the time in these games. And I think that there are other examples that we could talk about in a whole lot of other sports. We're just talking about match fixing, let alone the issues that you raised at the beginning in terms of this rape culture, this sexual assault and sexual abuse of women and girls, which I think is very rampant. And also something, because I've been very much involved for a long time with people from wrestling. You've had this with boys and men in addition too. You saw the Ohio State situation, with another so-called school doctor, this Strauss, did for the wrestling team there, and they try to shut up a lot of people. When Mike DeSabato, who was a wrestler there, started to expose this, and they try to impugn his motives, and Mike did this and that in the past. None of that had to do with anything. And they pressured some people who came forward, who spoke about it, who forced them to recant what they said. And some people from that team are no longer with us, like Kevin Randleman. And then of course you had this Jim Jordan, who was the assistant coach there, part of the cover-up.
Right.
But as odious a figure as this guy is, he wasn't the head coach. The head coach was Russ Hellickson, who's still around. And Russ Hellickson is more just a wrestling guy, more respected. You didn't see as much discussion about what's the role of Russ Hellickson. He was in charge of all of that. He was a head coach of a Division I champion, championship team that had championship wrestlers on it. Later it won a national championship after he was gone. You didn't see the discussion about that. So I agree that what we got to do now, we're not going to set this up tomorrow. We have to start talking about it and drumming up support about this issue. And that's what, we go back to what we want to do on this show, in the media, get people to talk about these issues. Why is there not a national sports integrity body with some powers in the United States? Well, we know the people that run these major sports and the networks wouldn't want it, but that gives us more reason to fight for it. But it's not even on the table. It's not even be considered. And that's why I think with Lisa, what you're doing is so important, because you're bringing this issue to the forefront, and that's what, that's the kind of thing we've been doing. We want to give voice to whatever sport is involved.
Yeah. Unfortunately, in many situations, we're reactive versus being proactive. We wait for whatever the big scandal is, right? I mean, you think the University of Minnesota in 98, when we had the academic scandal with the men's basketball program, they knew what was going on. And people knew from all the layers of the institution, but they allowed it to occur. So it wasn't until, woman scorn, one of the assistant coaches broke off in a relationship with her. Then she went to the paper and said, fine, do you know, I've written 200 papers for the men's basketball program. So they knew about it, but they were arrogant enough to think that nobody would ever find out. Well, nobody wanted to. Clem was doing well. Everybody liked Clem Haskins. They still like Clem Haskins. He's come back a few times and he's been given an award, recognition. So help me understand that. I don't understand that. So we have problems about being proactive. And then when something critical happens, we do a mass implementation of all these new policies and practices, and we overreact. And then many years later, we think it's never going to happen again, and we we invite people back and everything's okay for certain people, right? If it's,
Right.
depends on who it is, but there's a lot of, how do you get people to think about right and wrong in sport and accountability? I mean, this country is not about accountability, that's for sure right now. We're in
For
a
sure.
big world of hurt right now, even just determining what is black and what's white, so to speak, what's the truth and
Right, right.
and so if, you know, I think I'm not naive to think like, is this really the right time in society? Or maybe it's the perfect time because we've got people who can't agree on what's the right thing to do.
I
So
like
this-
what you said about well, here it would be an Office of Sports Integrity. I think that would emanate from the White House, probably has to
Yep.
be created out of the White House. And then, you know, a group like yourself, we can petition our congresswoman, because I can write a letter to Maxine Waters and ask her, you know, how come we can't add amendments to the Muhammad Ali Reform Act for boxers in this, you know, for more protection for fighters and that type of thing. So I think once we, you know, get enough people on board who can like tap the folks in Washington, we can get the ball rolling, because somebody paid Rudy Giuliani's son to be a sport something at that White House while Trump was in office and he didn't do anything. So I'm
Yeah.
sure we could put a real sports integrity organization out of the White House together, and that would help. Right? If you can-
I
Yeah.
will also, you know, you had also mentioned, Lisa, the Title IX, which has a lot of framework and a lot of small regulations.
But
so
who enforces Title IX?
Well, that enforcement is certainly part of it, but part of anything going forward can also be really combing through the existing regulatory frameworks from such things as Title IX. And it's the charters that have put in place organizations such as the United States Olympic Committee and so on, to see just where we can tease out opportunity. And to your point, Chris, about, you know, saying, hey, maybe this is something that sits in the White House. Well, those are the kinds of things that they can begin to look at
Mhm.
in terms of establishing what that framework really should be. How do we triage where the real pain points are? I would think protecting children in sports would be number one.
It is,
but-
but even the system that they have, Safe Sport, is not exactly a respected system. So, you know, I don't even think we have the right programs or regulatory infrastructure that we need. And we do a lot of things piecemeal. So we have systematic rape culture. So then we'll create Safe Sport. You have match fixing. So guess what? We'll have match fixing policy. And so instead of thinking of what is a coordinated approach, like what does integrity mean? It's not just illegal activity. There's also legal activity that's unethical. So it's looking at, you know, harassment. It's looking at racism. It's looking at a broad area of things to think about what goes into running a sports organization. So, but who's overseeing? To me, it's like, who oversees sport? How can you have AAU basketball and there's nobody that oversees it? So talk about potential for corruption, but who's going to oversee that? How do we know that we know there was bribery going on from the men's basketball scandal. It was more, you know, who was going to bribe kids through assistant coaches at colleges, but you don't think that that was occurring at the grassroots level? Like, we would be very naive not to think that that's not occurring. So there needs to be oversight of sport, period. And then you could say, okay, from that, who is responsible? Are they going to set up a unit within the White House? And then who's responsible? And then you could have USA Integrity be a part of that governance system. So I think just asking Maxine Waters, like, why is there no oversight of sport?
Well, I intend to write a letter after, I'm going to help have Eddie and Melissa help me. But yeah, I definitely want to write a letter because nothing happens in Congress unless you start writing letters or pinging your congressperson or, that's how it gets done, or sign a petition, get sports athletes to sign a petition so that generates some interest.
Mhm.
And I think we need some conferences or something on this. I mean, I know I haven't really tried for the last couple of years because of the pandemic and everything, but I spoke to the people from Play the Game a number of years ago and said, it's great you having these conferences in Europe. And I know they had one a few years ago in Colorado. I said, this would be perfect to hold it in New York. I went to Columbia and NYU. I still know some people there. I raised this with people that are on the faculty there, and nothing happened. I even spoke to the head of at the time, the journalism school at Columbia, who also taught sports journalism. And I started talking about Play the Game. He had never heard of Play the Game. It's like, it's like people are just in their own bubble, in their own shell. So I think anything we do in terms of media, conferences, writing letters, figuring out who is most interested in this, which sports people are most interested in this is just, and again, as Lisa said, not just one issue at a time, but overall understanding all these things. You could go endlessly. What happened to Kaepernick in the NFL? You could list all these things together and say, look, we need something that deals with all these issues. What do we do in terms of media and organization? What are the next steps that go on? Mm-hmm. And maybe the program you're doing at University of Minnesota is going to come up with some ideas and people involved there, because to me it looks like that's what you're utilizing that program for, to get people not just involved as a school project and then you graduate and you forget about it, but it's something that they would continue to do.
Yeah. The funny thing is I work mostly with colleagues in other countries. There's not really anybody in the US that except for Kathy Babiak at Michigan, but she's more corporate social responsibility. There's nobody in the US that I collaborate with regarding integrity. I have to go overseas. Yeah, there's nobody. You name me some other person that really looks at integrity in sports.
That is so sad.
Like corruption in sports. There
are a couple of people that do it. Declan Hill.
Yeah, but he doesn't do research. He has
his students doing it.
Yeah, but he's more, his background was a investigative journalist, which is good because to publish, you have to have valid, reliable data, but he has a lot of resources to figure out what's going on, in crime syndicates and that kind of stuff. Well, you can't do research on crime syndicates. How are you going to get data? Except for maybe when they've caught somebody, but he does good work in terms of digging up dirt. So that helps expose issues, right? We need people like him to expose, but then
is there a database that has a list of all the schools and crimes committed in sports or just sports in general?
The NCAA has their database of who's had major infractions, but that's not necessarily, that's just higher education, but we don't have a database of any type of integrity issues with youth sports, traveling sports. I mean, my colleagues and I, international group, of course, again, I've looked at fraud in community sport, and we just completed a survey and found that at least 10% of sport organizations, community sport organizations, have dealt with fraud. So I'm not talking about Boys and Girls Clubs or YMCA. I'm talking about, your local traveling, I don't know,
baseball
whatever, hockey
team,
club.
right,
Yeah.
hockey team, right.
So yeah. And those sports where, you have volunteers who are running the organization And lo and behold, whoever's the treasurer is,
Ripping the parents off.
well, they have access to money and there's no oversight. There's no internal controls. And there's so much turnover, right? Parents, the kids play, they volunteer, they leave. And so those internal controls don't necessarily get continually implemented, or the one person does it for so long because, oh my God, we need Sally, who's the treasurer, and she's so helpful. Well, Sally's taking 10% of everything because you're taking cash, you know, you still working cash or whatever. You don't have two people signing checks. So even just fraud in community sport is an issue, but we don't talk about that. But it's funny when when we were doing our survey, I had several people email me saying, you know, this is really important. I've been hit twice. It's like, let's talk, because there's something going on if you've been hit twice. So there's lots of issues, but again, it goes back to my point about who's overseeing sport.
No one.
Right. And then also, you know, what you're teasing out in these local organizations is some of them may not even have a real be even incorporated or a charity. Because if it's a charity, then okay, in the United States, it's subject to 50 different states and 50 different sets of laws regarding a charity, some of which are very stringent, some of which are less so. So yeah, it's really easy to put your finger, you know, that say, yeah, I got this great deal on uniforms, and you know, you're also outfitting your own family for the next year in a lot of really nice clothes, because there's not even an organization that has any oversight because it's not incorporated. It's not a charity. It's just some friends who have a baseball team.
Yeah. Well, and even like, you know, there's a lot of addiction or, you know, gambling, whatever, and that it's easy money if you have a gambling addiction, and you can take out a sport organization. Like if you lose, let's say $100,000, you're not getting that money back. That money's gone. And so it impacts participation. It impacts the community and their trust in the local sport organizations, because kids do fundraisers and I'm thinking, well, why would I give money to the local lacrosse club if they've had embezzlement? So we need conversations about the importance across the level, whether it's high performance sport, community sport, participation sport, about ensuring that we have integrity. I mean, I'm sounding like a broken record, but I feel like if I don't keep on saying this, it's not gonna, you know.
Right. It's about honor, right? And to me, it's a simple thing. I mean, I wish people were more honorable. We don't practice that anymore. So if you say, if you're pitching it to, I think if you're pitching it to families, it's got to be, you know, let's talk about fairness and honor and, you know, having some freaking morals and ethics and integrity.
Yeah. But don't you think if you went up to most parents, they would go, we're honest, we have integrity, until their son or daughter gets, I don't know, gets into trouble and they have to go to a tribunal and they're going to be, you know, suspended for 10 weeks. Then it hits the fan and they don't want to be held accountable, right? So there's always, oh, we're honest, we're this, but until something happens, then you really figure out who people are. When you squeeze, you know, like squeezing the orange, you really figure out what the juice is about, right?
Especially if that family has money.
I'm surprised, maybe I don't know of any instances, but I'm surprised that we haven't heard of cases of the parents of these young female gymnasts who were raped and abused, going up to this NASA and seeking justice by their own hands. I don't know if that's ever happened, but you know, that would be my gut reaction. It may not be the most effective thing to do, but I'm just surprised, particularly given the culture we have in the United States, that nobody just went in and you know, took the law into their own hands with this guy.
If it had been my kid, I would have been kicking his ass for real.
Well,
Yeah, but there's also, you know, you mention it and then you're placated with, well, you know, we're doing what we can, and you know, oh gee, but your daughter's going to have a place on the Olympic team.
It's terrible.
The implication that she'd be removed.
What would you want, if you, Lisa, have you found other people in the media that are interested in this overall issue in the United States or besides us?
No, I think I've had two, you're the second organization or group that's reached out to me, have conversations about issues related to integrity. The other person that contacted, they wanted more salacious stuff. And it was like, I don't do this for salacious, you know, I don't do this so that you can get ratings. I do this because I want to have a safe environment in sports. So that wasn't really as good a conversation as this one, where it's really, you know, talking about what are the real issues and then how can we conceptually think about addressing those issues, what's going to lead to change. And we're talking about systematic cultural change, which takes a long time and a lot of work. So, but you know, starting the conversation and getting media interested. But you know, with all the other things that are going on, I'm not so sure that this is sexy, right? Only until you have, I don't know, a case that really booms, like at Ohio State or Notre Dame, if something huge happens, or the Patriots, something huge happens, then it's of issue of interest, excuse me. But I think day to day, I don't think Sports Illustrated or whatever, I don't think they would, it just doesn't seem like, yeah, it's not important.
They're not even
on the
Sports
spectrum.
Illustrated anymore.
Yeah, it's not on the spectrum of importance. I think when certain things occur, then it's, you know, if it's Tiger Woods and he's had affairs, right? Then it's, or he was speeding, then it's
Infotainment.
It is. It's about, it's a part of the entertainment and making sure people continue to be connected. But you know, if you're always talking about integrity, that's important for people, right? Why do we have to talk about right or wrong?
There was a recent survey by Sports Pro Media of the most marketable athletes in the world. And number 1 and 2, I think I remember the order, was Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles. I might have mixed up who was 1 and 2. I think Naomi Osaka was number 1. And they both have recently had bouts with depression that they've very openly spoken about. And a lot of the media reaction when Naomi Osaka withdrew from a couple of tournaments and Simone Biles withdrew from a number of the Olympic events, and she didn't get a gold medal this time, and Naomi Osaka didn't win everything that she was in. There was a lot of real just disgusting blowback against them. So these are two of the most, you know, popular, well-known athletes, literally in the world. I think this is part of this, but I know people in the media that if some of them could be rallied together, there are people that are interested in this in one way or another, but people are sort of, number one, they're stuck in their little circle of whatever sport or sports they're focusing on. And number two, they're often hindered by what their editors want and or publishers want, which is, you know, the example that you gave of this other outlet. I mean, ESPN would prefer to have two people on TV of their hosts screaming at each other about who's going to win or lose something, when in most cases they don't even know what the hell they're talking about. Rather than dealing with this, they used to have the outside the lines. I don't even know if that's still on anymore. Maybe they moved that online or something. But there are people that I've come across that are interested in it, but it's sort of like scattered about. I mean, that's why I said something like a conference or something, or just using every tool that we have at our disposal to make this a central issue.
Yeah, I think it has to be like a strategic marketing campaign, right? So if you think of like the Women's Sports Foundation or even the Tucker Center for Girls and Women's Sport at the University of Minnesota in my department, they're really good about their social media presence or their media presence and how they market that it's important that women have a space in sport. Like it took a long time until probably in the last 2-3 years. It's cool and it's important to talk about women in sport and equality and the commercial side of it and how the return on investment is probably potentially more than the men, right? So but that's taken work. So I feel like there has to be a very strategic marketing plan, for the lack of a better word, that really focuses on like, what is integrity and why is it important? And, this needs to happen, because I know with the Tucker Center, they talked about, they had this really good branding of why is it important for women to have women coaches and women administrators. And they had like 3 talking points around it. And so it was really easy to get out in social media, to tweet about it and get people to remember it's important because of X, Y, Z. And so I think if you can have a similar type of campaign, so to speak, it takes a while, but eventually people latch on like, oh, we have this integrity problem, because now
Right.
finally people realize we have a women's equity issue in sport. Like, oh, we didn't know that like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, but now we finally realize it. So I think it takes work in terms of what the campaign is, what the branding is, so that people latch on to it.
Right. It's all about the pitch, fair, honest games, something people can remember, right? I get it.
Does your program also sponsor a journal specifically, or are there opportunities for calls for paper on one of the existing sports journals to focus on issues of integrity?
No, but I think, just having people do research in this area. I mean, I'm lucky I was able to recruit 2 PhD students from different countries, nobody locally, but they're on this. And so they're doing work with me. One was a former aerial skier, like international aerial skier, and the other one was a swimmer, but from 2 different countries. And so just, the presence of our website is attracting interested students, but they're from overseas, but that's fine. I don't really mind, as long as I've got people that are interested in doing the work, and we collaborate with people around the world. I mean, we're the Global Institute. We're not the USA Institute. We're the Global Institute. So we're okay with that. But I think maybe, it'll become sexy in the US. I don't know if it's sexy right now.
It's all about that marketing. Doesn't get sexy unless you got the right marketing.
What do you want, or how do you want people to contact you if they're interested in doing something about this, whether or not they're going to be directly involved in a graduate program or whatever level they are, or media people, other than just sort of Googling you and looking up the university's page and all that? Is there anything else at this point, or is that another thing that still has to be set up?
No, I mean, email me, lkihl@umn.edu, or I'm on Twitter. Those are the easiest ways to get a hold of me. I don't answer, I'm not on the phone, that's for sure. So don't bother calling my office. As you know, Eddie, I responded to your email, but I didn't respond to a phone call. So yeah,
I try everything. I'm
yeah,
trained in that.
you're showing your age. That's what.
Yes, that's true. But
These are seasoned journalists.
People don't call anymore. They text or they email you, right?
well, you can't text the landline, or you can, it won't go anywhere.
Yeah, true. I don't even know why I have a landline. I don't use it, but I guess you have to have one.
I know I noticed on the university website for your contact, they still list the fax number too.
Yes, I I don't even know the last time I've used a fax, but there's some organizations that want a fax. And we've had to
Yeah.
send faxes. So that's
In
kind
some
of weird.
countries, it's actually where internet connections are bad. We're going to have to start to, stir this up more, because I agree on this whole situation in the United States, because this in the sports, from what I've been able to tell, I did like a presentation once at a sports management program. It was more about MMA and the history and everything. It just seemed most of the people who were studying there, they want to become the next general manager of the Yankees or the next, owner of the Lakers, or something like that. They're not so much interested in these types of issues. And I told you already, this sports journalism people that didn't go too far either. This is in the United States, and this is in quote unquote liberal New York, where this has been going on. So internationally is the way to look, wherever the focus is going to be. Marshal your forces globally, because all these sports today are global. At least the major sports are all global. Look who plays in them, even if they're mainly located in one region. Certainly boxing is a global sport.
Yep.
And there are people from all over the world involved in that.
Yeah.
So we got to start to drum up.
We do. And the other thing, what's interesting, I mean, yes, sport is global, and it's really unregulated, right? It's self-regulation. And so crime syndicates know that. And so they look for weaknesses where they can launder money, bribe people. Like, we don't think that at some point, some high school or college tennis player is not going to be bribed, and they're going to bet on it in some, Singapore, to wherever. We don't think that that's not going to happen. I mean, ask Declan Hill. That's going to happen.
It's happened already. He documented a lot of that.
So, but not necessarily here regarding like college athletes. We haven't had instances where college athletes, tennis players, but yes, those on the circuit. But I'm just saying, like, unless, I don't think people like really see it as it being real, that the mafia is looking for the weaknesses in the sport regulation. They just don't see like it's going to happen. I tell my students, I'm like, okay, read this and see how this happened. And they still really like Asian mafia would come to the US and try and, bribe athletes and whatever. And I'm like, yeah, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Especially if they start legalizing betting in every state. I mean, there's 20 something states with minimal regulation. Minimal. Like, if you can bet on your mobile app and whatever, like, who's really overseeing that?
It's happened very rapidly. I mean, I watch a lot of baseball, and up until a few years ago, baseball had a stance, completely against gambling. It was related to banning Pete Rose, keeping him out of the Hall of Fame, despite all the records that he set and all that. Now, you turn on a baseball game or a show on the MLB network, half the ads are from these gambling companies. And instead of saying just, well, we think this team, here are the strengths and weaknesses of the team, and they have to get better pitching, whatever. They now, so here are the odds for the game. Here's who is favored to win the game. Here's who's favored to hit home runs today, and so forth. Just gambling stuff.
Yeah, and it'll get worse. You watch. They'll have live, as you're watching a game, it'll have like, these are the odds for the first foul, or these are the odds for the first, I don't know.
That is insane.
I mean, it's happened in other countries, and to think that it's not going to happen here because there's little regulation, it's going to happen. So we will have issues around gambling, debt, addiction. You watch, but we're reactive. We're not proactive as they're implementing policies and regulation. They're not thinking about, so how do we think about the public health issue related to gambling? How do we ensure that it's got appropriate oversight? What are the implications if you can bet with a credit card and versus having cash. Well, if you do it with a credit card, it's like paper money, right? It doesn't really exist. That can get somebody into trouble very, very quickly. But where are those conversations?
Yeah,
So
they're not happening.
no.
Not
So, you know, I just had a person, Brianne, I can't remember her last name because it was very long. And where's my syllabus? She came and spoke to my class this past Tuesday. She's from the, hang on. She is Brianna Dura Shawal. She is the VP for US Policy and Strategic Development at Epic Risk Management. She works with, in DC, about trying to think about how to have ethical sport gambling policy. And she has the statistics of how much revenue is being produced potentially, the gambling addiction data and what the potential of that is, how much money is invested in making sure this is in terms of the mental health issue. The US government spends no money on gambling addiction. It's not a part of their funding. So and here we're going to have unlimited sports betting. It's going to explode.
And no regulation, right?
Yeah.
Because it's 50 states.
Right.
Every state, again, has their own, just as every state has their own athletic commission that does whatever they please.
Right. And you watch, they'll say, how did this happen? So, yeah, we have a lot of work to do.
A lot of work to do. Well, look, Lisa, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Kihl, I should say, because you earned that doctor title. That's right. And we are going to wrap it up. But listen, before we go, I want you to tell everybody where they can find you again. Okay.
Yes, I am in the School of Kinesiology at the University of Minnesota, and I'm the director of the Global Institute for Responsible Sport Organization, #GearSo.
And what's your handle on Twitter?
Kihl_Lisa.
Right on.
Yes, everybody follow her and follow us back too.
That's
I
right.
follow you, Eddie, but I don't know
Do
if
you?
I follow Melissa and Chris. I'll have to.
I'll give you a
I'll
follow
follow
after we
you.
finish. Yeah.
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
We'll follow you.
All right.
Right on. Well, look, that's Melissa,
Thank
you want to
you.
give a shout out to everybody where you can find you, and then Eddie, you can go next.
Absolutely. I am at Girl Boxing Now on Twitter and Instagram, and my website is girlboxing.org. Just a little bit of a plug. I just redid it. So, you know, come have a look.
Go check it
And,
out.
Thank you so much for Dr. Kihl for being on the show with us. This was just fantastic.
Fantastic conversation. All right, Eddie, tell everybody where they can find you, my brother.
In New York, but online, Twitter at NHB News. You can go to my site, eddiegoldman.com, and my Patreon, patreon.com/Eddie Goldman. And I'll probably be one of many people watching the heavyweight wrestler in his last season for the University of Minnesota, Gable Steveson, I guess before he starts with the fake wrestling, going from real wrestling to fake wrestling. And I think a lot of people will be watching that. So that'll be something interesting. That whole discussion for another time is, my view is that the transition 100 some years ago of professional wrestling from a more or less real sport to a completely fake sport to a non-sport is in modern times the greatest example of sports corruption. An entire sport went fixed, but that's a discussion for another time.
That's right. Another time. All right, everybody. This has been the War Room. I am your host, Chris Baldwin, aka Fight Goddess, and you can find me on Twitter at Angry Afro Radio. I want to thank everybody on the panel again today. You guys have been awesome. This has been an awesome conversation. I can't wait to write my auntie Maxine Waters and tell her we need to get this going right now. So you guys, thanks again. We'll see you next time. Peace.